religious purposes in Jerusalem. This four-seat locomotive of a Malay type, that's two four-wheel units that enabled it to take the sharp curves, and others were followed. You can see it's a mixed train of freight cars and passenger coach. You can see much better here the Montefiore windmill and the locomotive shed. So this, I imagine, is around 1908, 1910. Tell me when I've gone. Okay, great. Well, I think we shouldn't forget the fact that in 1902 a book called Alt Neuland was published, a book written by Theodor Herzl. And Theodor Herzl, if you read the book, had big ideas for railroads in the Holy Land. He didn't think much of the Jaffa Jerusalem train. He decided it was no use to the early Zionists, although Leventin, the banker, did try and buy the railroad in the early 1900s. Well, what was Herzl thinking about? Well, he wanted to scrap this railway, and there wasn't much else here in any case, and build high-speed links running across the country. Trains like these that he'd read about and perhaps seen near Berlin that ran at 100 to 105 miles an hour. We don't have them yet, so Herzl was way ahead of us. He also wanted to build overhead monorails in the cities, which we don't have yet, at least they're not working properly yet. He wanted to build overhead monorails based on German models, a German model that appeared in the Wuppertal Railway that opened in 1901. So he was way ahead of the times in terms of his ideas for a high-speed railway links, and that would have included the Jaffa Jerusalem Railway. And of course, if you read Alt Neuland, you see one section when they're quite near Haifa. We've got two people in a motor vehicle, and one is saying, wow, look at that train, it doesn't have any smoke, there's no chimney. And this is what Herzl was referring to. It's certainly worth reading these sections. Coming back to reality, this is 1908. By this time, other railways had been built. One from Haifa towards Adira and connection with the Hejaz Railway, as you can see here. You can see the Jaffa Jerusalem line and the Baghdad Railway, at least, if not under construction, actually projected. This is 1908, and within a few years, everything changed. This is a picture of Jaffa, probably 1917. Not very clear, I'm afraid. It's taken from a book. This picture was in
the better version.
There's a better version. There are better. I'm sure there are better versions. What is interesting, though, in 1914, the First World War breaks out. One of the good things about the First World War, from the point of view of the historian, is that both the Germans and the British had aeroplanes with reconnaissance cameramen in them that took lots of very interesting photographs that tell us a great deal about what was happening. But what happened in the summer of 1915, the Turks ripped up the tracks from Jaffa to Lida. This picture actually shows the freight depot at Jaffa and the station, and basically there are a few tracks here, or at least where the tracks were can be seen. Here's the locomotive shed, and this is just a little bit of the picture. I'm sorry, it's a very poor reproduction, but just to indicate that people were monitoring the activities. Now, the reason the Turks ripped up the tracks is because the British could bombard them in Jaffa from boats, from battleships and at sea. So they decided to move the main works of the Jaffa Jerusalem Railway up to Jerusalem. They also widened the gauge of the railway to the Hejaz railway gauge, just a couple of inches more, not very much. Well, the Hejaz railway connection to Jerusalem remained in use. It was very important for the Turks and for the Germans. Here's General von Falkenhayn arriving with his daughter. I believe this is November 1917, not long before the end of the war, being greeted by the Turks at Jerusalem station. Well, the war ended, the British won, or the Allies won, and they widened the track gauge to standard gauge, 4 feet 8.5, like the tracks outside, and they sent their commission, this time of Zionists, included Hein Weizmann here, and we see Aronson just standing above, and various other very important people coming to investigate what to do with the Holy Land. These are ex-Egyptian railroad characters. Well, I'd like to finish with a story because it's related to an interest of Paul Cotterell. Paul was very interested in some extensions of the railroad during and just after the First World War. 5 minutes? Okay, great. This is a British map available from the Imperial War Museum in London. I'm not sure how clear it is, but you can see that from Jerusalem Station here, there's a line that literally zigzags all the way up towards Beira and Ramallah. This was built to the gauge of 60 centimetres to serve the British in 1918. There are several photographs taken of this railroad. Here we see it at Sanhedria. One of the poorer photographs, we see a locomotive, or two locomotives in fact, and a train, two tank cars carrying water for horses and men, as well as some empty cars. Well, one of the interesting things is that there's a great deal of interest in this type of locomotive. It's a Baldwin locomotive also, of the 460 type. And one of them has been restored in England. It was run for the first time a few weeks ago, and the second one is under restoration, and probably the third one. They have been brought back from places like India, because after the First World War, many of these locomotives used on the military railways were exported and used in industrial service, as was the case of the locomotives at the Ruttenberg power station, which were Hunslet 460 types, also a British War Department of 60 centimetre gauge. And at the Jaffa end of the line, where the tracks had been ripped up, the British built another 60 centimetre gauge line that after the war ran for almost a decade, carrying orange traffic and occasionally passengers. Here we see the harbour at Jaffa, one of the petrol tractors of the former British War Department on the 60 centimetre gauge track, standing in the yard at standing at the harbour at Jaffa. And again at Jaffa we see the cars. One of them is marked PR, Palestine Railways, but Palestine Railways own this 60 centimetre gauge railroad. And you can see, like earlier, the earlier 60 centimetre gauge railway we were showing pictures of, that the cars are loaded with boxes of oranges. And in June 1920, the British High Commissioner arrived to literally drive the first train from Lydda back to Jaffa on standard gauge tracks this time, and here's the train waiting for his arrival. And this is a picture of Jaffa, where all the Hejaz locomotives... I'm sorry, excuse me, thank you. Haifa, sorry, I'm going too fast. I'm glad you all recognise that. This is Haifa, where the British brought all the Hejaz locomotives, including the locomotives converted to Hejaz gauge from the Jaffa Jerusalem Railway, and you can just see one here, hardly visible, just there. But all these locomotives were, well, most of them were put back into service. The last Jaffa Jerusalem locomotive was taken out of service about 1930. Here's a view I took in the mid-1980s of Bitir station. That unfortunately was destroyed during the reconstruction of the line. But this is an interesting picture because it shows what I believe to be a water tank dating from around 1901, because one of the important functions of the railway was to bring water to Jerusalem, particularly in time of drought. And the Jaffa Jerusalem Railway, as you know, no longer runs all the way to Jerusalem. The reason being there are two major highways crossed by the railroad. So instead of building bridges or tunnels, the railroad now stops at Malcolm. And finally, I thank Ken for this picture of the restored Jaffa station. In fact, in the journal... sorry?
It looks even nicer.
It
looks nice.
Oh, it looks nicer. It looks much better. Looks nicer, and today it's actually been restored, literally restored, to the condition it looked around 1910 with the full canopy. I prefer it like this, the way that Ken took the picture. And probably it's going to be the centre soon of a small entertainment complex. I hope, however, that they do retain the atmosphere of the railway. Okay, everybody, thank you. I'm sorry.